Mm, mm, mm. Mm, mm. Mm, mm, mm. Mm, mm, mm. Mm, mm. Mm, mm, mm. Mm, mm, mm. Mm, mm. You went crazy. I just realized I don't even have my transition because I have a new computer and a new setup, and also I'm under the weather, so sorry about that. But I promised I'd do a stream, so here I am. Let me just go find another intro and just play it. Okay, here we go. Sorry, doing it live. Behind myself. There we go. That's what I'm doing. That's what I'm starting today. I'm supposed to just have that in my files, but for some reason I don't have it saved. And I was looking just now, so whenever you have something reference a file that's no longer there, it just obviously it won't play. So um, anyway, hello everybody. I'm trying to remember everything. Whoops, I'm not trying to show you guys all of my information. Where should I park this page? Maybe on my chat. Um, and then I actually no, I can go big picture. Let me make sure I've saved my. Okay, so the chat's actually. Sorry, I'm literally trying to figure everything out at the moment, and I'm also sick, so I was trying to make sure. I well, first I was trying to look for that file to see if I had it in my downloads, but I for some reason I don't see it. I have. Oh wait a minute. Okay. All right. Never mind. Never mind. Never mind. We're doing this live. Okay, so apparently I did have it. Sorry. All right, here we go. There we go. Okay, now we have a proper start to a podcast. Excuse me. Anyway, so you'll be having to deal with that a lot. Um, your opinion is noted, Hyperborean, and ignored, by the way. Um, nice new digs. What do you mean? I can't believe you have done this. Well, luckily it's not COVID, as far as I know, because I've had it before. But I'm not really sure. I just got like congested, you know? The past 3 days I was like pretty weak and congested. So probably the flu or cold. But anyway, um I'm slowly coming out of it, but you'll hear me cough and all that good stuff. Yeah, I had COVID last year. In fact, in one of my videos, I talked about having COVID. I don't remember which video it is because I have a horrible memory, but one of the videos specifically, I said that I was literally recovering from COVID while I was doing the voiceover, and it was fucking hard. That was the hardest voiceover I've ever done. You see me coughing right now? Before it was like, oh, sorry, you're ZB. You're talking about the background, yeah. So this, I'm staying at a new place in Mexico City. It's been so long that we've talked that you guys don't know that I moved to Mexico City. Well, at least most of you might not know. But I was planning to move somewhere, and that's where I ended up going. Closing up my shelves. I didn't even notice they were all open. Anyway, yeah, so I appreciate that. The comment about the new surrounding, it is nicer. Obviously, I don't really have anything up right now, including even sound canceling stuff. But I have my desk, I've got a chair, and yeah, so that's the part that matters. Oh, if you hear chewing in the background, that's my dog. She's just walking around chewing. Right as I said that, you can hear him moving her bone around. Did I miss anything? Audio not coming through. Oh no, the audio for the actual video thing didn't come through. Damn, well, that sucks. Well, I was hoping that it went through. I played it from the source. Anyway, it's been a while. How's everybody doing? For those of you who haven't seen me before or talked to me before, this is your chance to ask me questions and get to know me better personally if you want, or get to know me better based on my content. And then for those that remember me, you know, we can catch up, talk about, as I say in the title, anything MMO related, multiplayer game related. At the moment, I've just been thinking a lot about games like Halo Infinite. I'm covering Champions Online at the moment. So those two games have been pretty big in my head. But I play a lot of games and all kinds of games, so it's not necessarily like that those are the only games that I play, but those are the only games that I'm focused on, I guess, like intellectually, if you will, at the moment. But obviously, after Champions Online, you know, I like to always tell everybody on the stream what I'm gonna do before I announce it. But I probably will do something like Gwent. But we'll see. It feels really good to do Champions Online, honestly. It's such a really good story. Really interesting. And just it has every, I don't know, it feels like an epic, you know, like the story of Champions Online, you know, guys, I know I never hype up anything like crazy, but like it just has every angle. There's like intrigue in the story, there's mystery, there's like things that people didn't know probably. There's the parts that people know that are still quite controversial about the game. There's the early history of the game. It really is an interesting project, so I can't wait to cover it in a video for you guys. I'm writing the script right now, but yeah, it's well, it's also the story of Cryptic after City of Heroes, which was a very different company, and it's why you can see that. I don't want to spoil too much, but the reason why Neverwinter Star Trek Online, and Champions Online all play similar is because they're on the same engine with very little variance. I mean, you can feel that essentially. And people will say, yeah, but engines can change and so on and so forth. these games were made in essentially parallel with each other. So good luck doing that in any serious capacity. But anyway, what I found most interesting about that is that Cryptic essentially got those three contracts because of the name that they had created from City of Heroes. But here's the crazy part about it, without spoiling too much of the story. A lot of people who are in the know this already, but like that Cryptic wasn't even the same people anymore. Most of the people that worked on City of Heroes did not stay with the company. And I think that that's pretty eye-opening for people wondering, how did Cryptic go so bad, or how did things change so much, or how did they make these games that seem like carbon copies of each other, versus you have City of Heroes, which is literally a one of a kind, like MMO. Even if you don't like it, it's incredibly unique and offers a lot in terms of innovation, even today. So yeah, it's interesting because it's like they got acquired by Atari, and then boom, they got these three contracts pretty much announced subsequently, almost at the same time. So I think that it's you know, again, I'm trying not to spoil that much, but I'll say one thing, and I feel like this has been known before for anyone who really knows like my view of kind of some of the more established IPs in their games. And if you saw my Star Trek Online video, then you probably already know my stance on Cryptic. I don't like Cryptic Studios, and I don't think I've really ever liked them ever since the whole Paragon Studios split. Um, and it's because primarily, ever since they got acquired, the first time by Atari, and then the second time by PWE, and then now by another company, Embracer Group, they were pretty much always profit driven. And like, what I mean by that is like a company is supposed to make money, but like when a game is more focused on making money than actually offering anything like unique or fun or intriguing, I feel like it's pretty noticeable, especially when you compare it to competitors. Like in the case of Neverwinter Online, like what does it offer really that's different, new, or innovative compared to even just Neverwinter 2 online? Like the multiplayer of Neverwinter 2 or 1. It doesn't. And it's because that wasn't their goal. Do you see what I'm saying? But imagine making an MMO and not wanting that to be your goal, to do more than that. Of course you would do that. You're right. Of course you would use that as like your barrier. Okay, we need to be better than this. Unless you were using the same exact engine with similar concepts and basically just trying to get it out as soon as possible so you can make a lot of money off of it. I just, you know, I don't have the most, I guess, positive things to say about Cryptic. They don't have much positive on their record, to be honest. Even if you go into the successes of some of their games, look at how much they mess up just because of monetization and the way that they handle monetization. For example, in Neverwinter Nights Online and Star Trek Online, they had these systems called Founder Systems or Chronicler Systems and Galaxies. These where you could create your own quest, right? Well, they got rid of these. And they got rid of them because they go against the idea of them monetizing you in the way that they can trickle new content out. And literally, that's the only reason. Literally, why else would you get rid of a system that gives you content? Think about that. It gives you content, the players enjoy it, and the players enjoy playing with it. So what is the only reason you would get rid of that system? They got rid of it because it wasn't in line with their monetization. They would have had to make it payable. Think about that. Because otherwise people would just keep making content for themselves. And they can't monetize that with a theme park style of a game. And I guess those three games in particular, you know, people will often call World of Warcraft in any iteration a theme park, and it is. But at the same time, WoW offers a lot in the way of the world itself, right? And not just because of an established IP, but because it actually establishes the world and the characters and the story. And so I feel like sometimes it's maligned because it was so popular and like the most popular game, but like it was innovative, it was successful, it did do a lot of things right. Did it change and kind of get more annoying, kind of murky the waters, or muddy the waters, make them murky, I guess? Yes, but it's still WoW. Like it's like whenever I played the game, and I even did a review on it, the classic version, and I've told people this, like, and I'll die on this hill. I think WoW has some of the best gameplay I've ever played. Like truly speaking, the game is so fucking polished and so smooth. And before they ruin the classes had such great identity, and they really feel like they make sense with whatever they're trying to accomplish. The gameplay in WoW really is just fantastic. And it's crazy that you have that from a game even back in 2004, 2005, 2006, 2007, and games like Champions Online, Star Trek Online, and so on and so forth came out in 2009. 2009 or 2010. So it's like these games come out like much later, and they still don't really have the like better or smoother gameplay than WoW. And so gameplay can be subjective in the sense that people have different metrics of what they consider good gameplay. Like for some people, they like fast-paced gameplay. For some people, they like slow turn-based gameplay. For a tab target game, for example, people prefer like traditional tab target players prefer a large amount of skill choices, a large amount of options to choose from, big brain builds, kind of outsmarting people. That's generally speaking what tab target players prefer. Like the action-oriented players prefer capitalizing on a moment, comboing somebody, disabling somebody, or getting like a quick kill, right? And so some games have combined these styles together, mixed them together masterfully. Arcade, I think one of the best games in terms of combat in the entire industry, even still today, which is why I'm excited about Arcade 2, and I really hope that they can do more with that formula, because it still does have some of the best hybrid gameplay I think I've ever experienced. And I can create a discussion today where we can talk about what is the best type of gameplay in combat. But ultimately speaking, it is opinion based, and I'm not just trying to say that as like a cop out to not have to talk about it. But it's just that, like, you know, think about RPGs. RPGs play in so many different ways. Mass Effect is an RPG. Tactics Ogre is a RPG. Final Fantasy, Persona. These games all play in different but kind of similar ways in some ways. Maybe operate under the same tenets in some respects, but the gameplays are pretty different. In MMOs, we kind of have tab target, we've got action combat, and then we've got, I guess, what you would call like a hybrid of the two. Now, the issues with these, and I did a video on these before, but the issue with these systems are typically this. With a tab target game, developers have fallen into a habit of making the same thing. This is not good for innovation, it's not good for fun, it's not good for business even, which is the weird part about it. I guess in terms of slowing how much or lowering the amount of budget required to put into something initially, maybe. But like, what I'm trying to say is that the reason why tab target gets such a bad rep nowadays, I think, is just because it's basically fallen to the wayside. It's not innovated, it's not changing anything significantly, it's not offering what it used to offer and then some. It's not even offering what it used to offer. In fact, I'll go into a rant about that because it drives me mad that people will be very negative about tab target games, and I'll be the first to say that, like, while you can have a preference, of course, I think that it's very hard to argue that a tab target game isn't incredibly both fun and rewarding. And the reason for that is because a tab target game allows players to perform at a higher level who don't have the technical ability to mash a bunch of buttons really quickly, or know how to like press it at the right moment with the perfect reaction time, or so on and so forth, which is most of the MMO audience. You see what I'm saying? It's like, don't get me wrong, I played for like 6 years Darkfall, one of the most action-oriented Quake-style MMOs there is. And it was awesome. But the truth is that's such a niche style of gameplay and combat for now. Maybe in the future as it becomes more common, but just at the moment it's not. And the reason being is because the industry was started by tab target players. What does that mean? It means that initially MMOs were created for the big brainer. The person who thought a lot, the person who read, the person who created guides, the person who practiced over and over again. MMOs, as I've constantly echoed, were started by massive nerds, the biggest nerds on the planet. And I've met and talked to many of them. They're great people. I'm not being insulting, but I'm just saying, like, MMO in the industry of virtual worlds was created by the biggest nerds on the planet. These are some of the biggest power gamers, biggest role players, you name it, right? And so these initial games were very much created by these massive fans. I mean, that's the history of every initial MMO that took the name MMO, RPG. I should add that part on. So 1999 and on. all of those are created by massive D&D fans, massive Deku Mud fans, which is a mud. Muds were created by a super nerd who went on to create a few other games everyone knows already. So the point is the industry was very much started with tactical gameplay and having attributes and class identity and working together in a group and so on and so forth. Now, as the games became more advanced, tab targets started to become more like actual tab target, where you had to tab between targets and you could kind of aim some things, and then sometimes you had to look at your target. These are some cool innovations that happened in the early 2000s. So meaning these are old innovations. You'll play games today with tab target systems that don't have these innovations. And it's crazy because people will sit there and say, just because they don't understand history, a problem in many other fields as well, including the real world outside of the virtual space, but because they don't understand the history or recognize that it's there, basically they're allowing themselves to play and accept worse games. And I know this might be a harder concept for some people to understand, but it's this: like, if the education of the fan base increases, the education of the developers has to increase. Otherwise, the expectations are much too high for the developers to even satisfy, right? Now, I feel like there's a lot of industries that are like this. Look at how devout Dark Souls style fans are about that style of game, and how if you come out in that type of field or genre now, you have to come correct, because the fan base is so educated that they expect that you're going to have this input with this and the speed here and the chances to get the unlocks here, and there's an expectation there. I've made this argument before, but it's sad but true, that in the case of MMOs, the expectation is just them being online and being massive, whatever that even means. Which is sad, because that's not much expectation. We don't even have an expectation for a world anymore. It's really just, well, a bunch of people playing at the same time, playing the same game. And so, again, you might say, well, it's because there's more players in the space, there's a lot more casual players. True, but it's because those casual players were targeted when the industry originally wasn't necessarily made for that type of player. Now, that's not controversial for a player like that to suddenly play the game and enjoy it. That happens all the time. Sometimes you discover a game or genre or art that you didn't initially like that you end up liking. But the point that I'm making, and the distinction I'm making between attracting an audience that didn't originally play the games and wasn't originally attracted to them, is that if you venture too far off into that territory, essentially you lose the plot. Like, you don't have the core audiences anymore. And I think the issue with not having a core audience anymore is, well, then you're just basically chasing a trend. And I think that if we go back to the core of what it means to be these types of games, there is certain expectations to be met there. And anyway, but yeah, so I don't have the highest opinion of Cryptic Studios, but I do have a high opinion of WoW's gameplay. Oh, right, I wasn't finished going into my point about, sorry, I'm sick, like I said, guys, if you can't tell by how I sound, but about the combat. So let's talk about action combat. The problem with action combat is, I mean, there's just a plethora of problems, right? While tab targets problems are more so the developers just sucking at making it, right? Think about that for a second. If developers can make good tab target combat, there's little complaints about it. That's why these games that have them are so incredibly famous and well known for them. Now think about an action game. It flips that on its whole head, and it's because if you mess up the action combat, then you ruin your game. If the action combat isn't good enough, that's the focus of your game. Your game's toast. If your game can't keep the action combat going because of the servers, the optimizations, so on and so forth, you get the idea. So action combat becomes incredibly problematic, because essentially it becomes a bunch of variables, literally and mathematically, by the way, that you have to constantly recognize, because it's updating on the server while being a 3D game. So every time a fireball, projectile, so on and so forth, that needs to get updated to the server. So you imagine that with the amount of players, so on and so forth, and action games become very complicated for that reason. So what some developers, in my opinion, the Korean developers, and European developers, ironically, were the first to make this famous, and feel free to fact check me if you want to try. Spellborn Chronicles is one of the first MMOs to seriously use the later Unreal Engine, the Unreal Engine 3. And Spellborn was like 2007, I believe, or somewhere around there. Was a European indie MMO that essentially had Unreal Engine action combat. It was fairly like rudimentary, but considering how early that was, Europe was ahead of the West, or the rest of the West in that respect. Now, to go back further, Japan technically was the furthest with PSO, but PSO wasn't an MMO. It was a MMORPG, as they were dubbing it, which is just fancy for it's not an MMO, basically, is what they meant by distinguishing it. But so Japan, Korea, really the East, we have to thank for action combat, in my opinion. Very few Western developers took the chance before those developers did. Even Darkfall, the game I referenced, it was created in Greece. So again, Western, as in the US, weren't even taking a chance on that kind of game. So because of these risks that I'm mentioning, now some developers, like I was saying, kind of figured, you know what, let's like try to do something in between. Let's mix these together. That was the biggest innovation, I think, in the industry, and so far still is the biggest innovation in the industry, because you continue to see games created more so with this perspective. And that's hybrid combat, like in ArcAge, in Black Desert Online, because it's not full action combat, I think, despite what people say. Blade and Soul. Well, Blue Protocol hasn't even come out yet, but it was trying to be a hybrid. Guild Wars 2, great, of course. In my opinion, the best combat system in that field. I just think that it's also the hardest. So that's my personal opinion. I think ArcAge is better because ArcAge was a lot more transferable to more players. I think Guild Wars 2 is too complicated. Like, they basically made a game that was too hard. And I know for casual players right now, they're like, it's easy, bro, it's easy. Guys, I was a former pro player. I'm talking about the highest levels. Guild Wars 2 is like insanely cracked. It's insane the level of crackness those players have. Because they're making decisions, like I was saying, in the action-oriented sense, with a tap target brain and a build. It's like, yeah, I'm not just saying that because I was a pro. I'm saying those guys are cracked, man. Like, they just, their ability to make decisions in split moments is just insane. And for anyone who thinks otherwise, go play Guild Wars 2 PvP. It's a self-taught lesson. I was actually going to download it again. The only reason why I didn't have it downloaded and stopped playing was because I don't know if I mentioned, but my other hard drive crapped out. Literally had to get a new one, so I've been downloading games back onto it slowly. I didn't reach out at all because I was going pretty hard on the combat stuff, but hopefully that explains the combat systems more to you guys and kind of why you don't just see developers go for like the flashiest systems, or, you know, seemingly developers seem to kind of go for the similar systems that they constantly go for. It's because of those reasons. Like, an MMO combat is important, but typically speaking, it isn't the most important. So they feel like essentially, well, I can kind of get away with having a lackluster system here. And I think that that's just changed in 2023 now, you know what I mean? Like, I think it was changed before is my point, but with the rise of these Eastern developers who've brought these new fun action combat systems, I think that stuff's mostly dead. I think you actually do need to have a good enough combat system. I can tell you, me personally, whenever it's time for me to make an MMO, which is sometime in the future because I'm making single player games first, that's what I would do. Even if it was a 2D game, whatever kind of simple graphics it was, I would make sure that the combat was serviceable. And to me, what that means is that, because I didn't really mention my personal opinion of kind of like how to make tap target combat the best and why it is so great, even better than action combat a lot of the time. The reason for that is because in an action combat context, strategy basically just goes out the window if you can't react fast enough. And that's the problem with mixing them two together too much and making a game too action combat, especially in an online massive context where strategy is usually a big focus. It's the problem that Guild Wars 2 has. It's the problem I've explained many times, even on stream, that Guild Wars 2 has, is that sometimes I'll be playing Guild Wars 2, and other players here have had this experience, I'm sure. You'll do a play, and you'll feel like nobody even notices it. Even when I've been streaming and I was streaming back as a pro player, you feel like nobody even noticed what you just did. And that like I'd have to start slowing things down and showing people, hey, look, I like timed this with the fear here, with the strip boom here, with the boom 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 boom. Like, and you'd have to like show everyone meticulously what you did, and they'd be like, oh wow, that's impressive, or just be like, oh cool, you know, like nonchalantly, and you're like, but it's bad time to cough, but it's incredible playing, you know, like nobody really cares. That's the difficulty of going too much into that direction, is that basically the problem that Guild Wars 2 has is that the skill cap is knowing even what to do is part of it, right? Like in a traditional MMO context, everyone is familiar with that, in tap target context especially. The problems arise when you introduce things like timing, short second durations on things, having to account for boons and conditions, right? Knowing what the differences of them are, having to know how all the classes and the different builds work, and there's a lot of them, right? So essentially, even if you're a, say for example, a mechanical beast, and you just like can make a bunch of amazing decisions as a game player, right, mechanically, you'll still get stomped by good players because they know that you're making poor decisions, right? And to give an example of this, when I played the game when it initially came out, Guild Wars 2, there was this very common build called like the 100 swords or 100 swipe or whatever, warrior, bulls charge crap. You know, it's still around, but back then it was incredibly common because it was very OP in terms of they nerfed a lot of the power systems, and I'm not saying that that was necessarily warranted, but it was pretty crazy back then. Now, I didn't have any issue with it. So I didn't care if they buffed it or nerfed it. Now, why is that? It's because I played a Necro, and because I played with a build that specifically made it to where when I got stunned, I immediately feared whoever stunned me. So I put that in there because I knew Bulls Charge Warriors would try to Bulls Charge me. So immediately they get stunned, or I get stunned, but they get feared away, right? And then I also have a stun break, so then I can stun break. And then after they try to re-engage in me, I can go into my shroud, I can fear them again, right? I can start slowing them, I can run, I can start kiting them after I get my scepter and dagger out, or scepter and focus, or warhorn or whatever. I'm probably focus. I like focus the most because it removes boons, but you get the idea. The idea is that essentially you can have these very powerful builds, but with somebody in a game like Guild Wars 2, if they can just big brain you, you'll never beat them, basically. And so that's why the game is so complicated, because it's both this mixture of having a big brain, but also making the decisions very quickly. And WildStar, I would say, had a level of that too. I saw somebody else mention WildStar previously, so I played WildStar in Alpha. I mentioned that before. I was also in the closed beta test, or there was a closed alpha into closed beta guild test, right? I played with a guild called Condemned. They were the most successful guild in Global Agenda, who went and played as a guild together in the beta in WildStar. And so we had the best arena players, we had the Warpath Warplot players, we had the Raiders, so on and so forth. And the game was an incredibly high skill cap. Like me playing with players that were from Guild Wars 2, pros, like Phantom, for example. If anyone here knows pro players, then you know Phantom. Players like that were the players I was playing with in WildStar. So the skill combat was there. I think the issues with WildStar were about balancing, right? I think lack of variety in the play of these classes and how they played is not a problem that Guild Wars 2 suffers from, for example, but that game suffers from it. And it actually was the whole Dance Dance Revolution thing lagged the game out even more than it was kind of necessary. And I wasn't a hater of it. I didn't think it's bad, the telegraph system. But I think that it becomes essentially unplayable when your whole game is based on 40-person raids, Dance Dance Revolution style. Would it be better to watch this on YouTube or Twitch? I said that like an hour later. Probably YouTube. Can you do a death of pitter patter? Can you do a death of video on Rise of Incarnates? I'm not familiar with it, but yeah, definitely. How can I find the joy for gaming without drugs? Need for speed? You mean you need speed? I wouldn't be doing that as a drug. Are you still moving to Portugal? No, actually. Mexico is where I'm going to end up and where I'm at. Portugal and España were son opciones, but I just decided against going there for a number of reasons I can dive into if people are curious, but I just thought that Mexico was a better fit for me and I enjoy it. What's up, Andre? What's up, Lucas? Is there an MMO I should play if I don't like MMOs? Yeah, Guild Wars 2. Guild Wars 2, Final Fantasy 14. I mean, pretty much the most popular games right now. ESO. If you don't like MMOs, those are all great games to play. Because you can play by yourself, pretty much. You don't really have to interact with other people. You don't even have to group with other people if you don't want to. Yeah, bogus. People have been that way with BioWare for how long now? Like, yeesh. And they just lost another developer. It's like crazy. Yeah, Hunter Miller. So a lot of the time people do contact me before the videos about the games themselves. Either beta testers, alpha testers, prior developers, so on and so forth. And yeah, very oftentimes, in fact, probably more often, I get contacted after. And so people know I have a community post and I reach out to everyone to give me information essentially. And during that community post on my channel, I'll typically get the most information throughout that time. Emails, messages, so on and so forth. But yeah, a couple of times I've gotten information after the fact. And so there's a couple things about that. For starters, I don't just blindly agree with a developer just because they worked on a game. Like, for example, I've blatantly disagreed to developers' faces and to them in voice calls because I just don't agree with their perspective about how things went down or their perspective on how things could have been fixed. And I've always been that way since I was young. I care so much about these games because of what they've done for my life and myself, and I just also love them so much just from a intellectual perspective even. So it's like I'm pretty defensive of them to the point to where I don't care how other developers or companies or whatever treat me or see me in that respect, because ultimately I'm not just being critical for the sense of it. I'm being critical because I care. You know, like anytime I've ever done that, gone to bat with a developer, it's because I cared. No, there's been a few times I've gotten really good responses after the videos where developers have contacted me and said, you did a great job. I got that from Spellbreak developers. I got that from, obviously this is just off the top of my head, Gigantic developers. Said thanks for how you handled the story on that. You know, a couple other ones, of course, but those are probably like the biggest examples I can think of. Oh, Fortnite. I have, like, I think one of the heads of Fortnite follows me. So I did get a couple very high profile developers and of course some lesser known working in the trenches developers that I greatly respect as well contact me and say, hey, you did a great job. I've also gotten developers contact me and say, hey, you missed some details. And I've had maybe one or two developers contact me and say, you got this part wrong. And in one of those cases, it was just, I think, a misunderstanding of what I was trying to say. I think we came away in agreement. The other one was essentially over something that was about Funcom. It was actually, most famously, there was even a thread about it on Reddit. I don't even know, but it was one of these developer, like Funcom community managers was saying shit on my Age of Conan video, and actually a bunch of people fact-checked the guy and didn't like how he talked and how he acted and brought up his history. It was bizarre. But so yeah, I have had experiences like that. In terms of doing follow-up videos, the thing about me, guys, is that as it stands right now, I already have a hard time monetizing and making a living. So it's like hard for me to be like, how can I make more content and more work that's not going to get me paid potentially? It's like, it's just too hard right now. That's why I've actually just started writing as much as I can to try to get the Death of a Games out in my side videos again. If you guys have noticed that more. And even right now I have a side video I'm working on, which is why paid boosts suck and I hate them. And I also have the Death of a Game that I'm working on, Champions Online, which I'm gonna target for next week, so the end of next week. So I'm trying to pick up the pace a little bit because I'm in a better space now. I was working on the ground for 3 months. I was sleeping on the ground, working on the ground, and yeah, needless to say, that's why I wasn't streaming. And work during that time was pretty painful and not so productive. I feel a lot more productive now, so that's obviously going to contribute to me working a lot more. But yeah, so I think it would be great to have follow-up videos like that, and I do want to have follow-ups. For example, even on my streams, I like to do follow-ups typically. I was doing that before I moved, which has been now like a 6-month process, and before that, the year, because I didn't have a place to stay for a whole year. I was just moving around, trying stuff out. So anyway. Also, one thing I didn't say, Hunter, is that sometimes I've also disagreed with these developers in the sense that, and you might ask, well, where is your ground to disagree with them? I think it's because oftentimes these developers only ever worked on one game. They never played any of these other games, and some of them even admit it to me. So it's like they have incredibly specialized perspectives in one specific type of game, while having an incredibly shallow perspective of the industry as a whole. When you're building a world, that's pretty imperative, right? You have to know how the other worlds function. When you're not building a world and you're just building a game, then you don't care how the other worlds work, what they're innovating on, what they're doing. Who cares, right? Like the point I made about Neverwinter Nights Online, why I hate that game, is because it doesn't feel like it innovated literally at all in regards to Neverwinter as a franchise. Neverwinter AOL was already essentially more impactful of a RP experience, and then Neverwinter Nights 1 and 2 multiplayer servers are way more inviting and fun than Neverwinter Nights Online is. And so it's like, those types of things I'll disagree and debate developers over, like, to the end of time, because it's just like, you cannot convince me. You guys went into Neverwinter Nights 2 servers and we're like, all right, Neverwinter Nights Online is going to be a good upgrade from this. It's like, there's literally no planet that you guys ever did that. And so I know that they didn't do that. And it was more about capitalizing off of a popular IP to make money. So I guess what I'm trying to say is the perspective from a developer like that is less interesting to me, as you could imagine. But like developer perspective that I got, for example, from like Raf Koster, who's like one of the probably my idols in terms of the industry, or other serious developers like that, like having conversations with the pioneers in the industry. That's more the people that I'm like, okay, like I really want to take in what these people have to say. Now, on the same line, you guys know I spoke to Richard Garriott, the guy that coined the term MMORPG. And if you saw that video, which is probably why he never messaged me back, but and I'm also coming for you, Richard, on that Shroud of the Avatar game. I'm making a video about it, but never messaged me again. But it was because like he was sitting there telling me about Tabula Rasa and about like the reasons for stuff. And I remember I asked him like point blank because I felt like he was beating around the bush. Did you think that this affected the development? And he said no. And I just thought, literally, no one can ever say that with a clear like brain unless they're just delusional. So it like really opened my eyes up. Because that's one of my early Death of a Games. I've mentioned this story before, but that's why I didn't rely so much on developer testimony anymore. It was because early on I was trying as much as I could. And then when I'm getting fed stuff like this from literally the guy that was the head of the project, it's kind of like, okay, well, I'm an investigator. I don't give a fuck if people feel like, well, you need to go to the people that created the game. No, that's not how investigation works, right? Like if I go to them, are they going to tell me everything? How many developers will actually tell me everything? I can tell you because I talk to a lot of them. They can't. Sometimes they can't even tell me who they are. They tell me literally, please say this was an anonymous source. Why? Because they still work in the industry. They don't want heat on them. They can't take that kind of heat. So it's just like that kind of stuff is where I'm a little bit more antagonistic about it, in the sense that it's like, well, I try to get the best story I can, which means listening to those developer testimonies, but I don't just take their word for it. And that's the part that has gotten me in, some debates before, I think in those circles. But it's like, at the end of the day, just like the people that I've met and worked with in consulting and beta testing and so on and so forth, people know where I stand. They know where my passion is, and they know that I care about these games. Cryptic didn't have a selling out point, they always sold out. Yeah, I guess that's fair, Luckiest Mage. Have you played the Paragon remakes 14 times? I actually really want to. I haven't, and I've been looking to get into an MMO again as a community. I've just been struggling to pick which one because it's like so many of the current ones that are like popular don't really have anything that you can do as a group. I had that experience when I was playing Final Fantasy 14 with one of my friends. Like, unless we're just not doing dungeons or raid, we literally could not play together half the time. And it's just like following each other around and leaving groups and like rejoining group, and it's just like, I want to play Final Fantasy 14, but probably on my own, right? Maybe ask some people to play groups and dungeons and raids and trials with me. But I mean, in terms of like the level up experience past 50, which I've already done, I wanted to do that alone. But I want to find a game that I could play with other people. Just out of curiosity, Des, why do you think WoW isn't your style? That's how I feel too, Adric, honestly. Excuse me. For those who haven't heard, I'm sick, sorry. Thanks, Aries, I appreciate it. I would say tab targeting has a lower entry of skill ceiling in the sense that you can get away with doing way less. In an action game, that's an actual action game especially, if you just don't do anything, you'll just lose, right? But like there's a lot of, in fact, I can show you many clips of me playing tab target games where I can play relatively AFK specs and still kill a lot of people, right? Because the specs are more so based on auras and PBAOEs and so on and so forth. I'm actually surprised there's not more MMOs like that, Balthy. More like Dragon Age and Baldur's Gate, like turn-based stuff. I know a few tried, Atlantis, a few others, but first on the list, Square Enix. Well, they're not dead yet, but it is crazy how many times they mess up. Like everyone likes to post that on my videos, but it is pretty alarming to think about. I would agree, Eric. I actually just said that to one of my friends recently, that I don't really think that the big companies are going to push the innovation anymore. And I think that's been the biggest problem in the industry, is that we've just been waiting for them to, and they're not going to. So it's going to take the smaller developers to do it, which means it's going to take time. But then the big publishers and companies will come and swoop in and take the success like they always do. But I can kind of agree with that Hyperborean struggler. The whole idea of a fighting game or action combat MMOs being too much like a fighting game, in the sense that they're immediately alienating the people that can't play those types of games. I think there's some compromises to make there. And I think people would agree with me who've played these hybrid games. What if you have some classes that are actually action combat based? And you can aim and you do more damage that way. And then you can get rid of the aiming and you do less damage. Galaxies did that. Other games have done that. You can get rid of the auto locking. Maybe you do less damage. Maybe you have to aim a little bit more. Maybe you just create, like I want to create in my single player game, the combat I want to create is what I call tempo based. Its base tempo is and rhythm is a big part of combat, and it's always dependent on what weapon and what object you're using. So if you're just like punching, then there's pretty much always combos to it, because very often and very rarely, I should say, one isn't enough, right? Especially if someone's like armored or like in another universe, one punch isn't enough. So you don't have that one punch man kind of fighting guy approach in a game that I would want to create. It would be combo based. It would be landing shots, landing shots, landing shots, right? But if I'm fighting with a spear, well then if I have the same tempo and rhythm as that, then it doesn't really fit. And so many games have that. That's the problem, I feel like, with their tab target systems, even to go to MMOs, is that The systems are essentially just everyone plays the same rhythm, and they shouldn't. Weapons should attack in different frame data, at different speed, at different ranges. Excuse me. Should be utilized in different ways. It's kind of like some people will complain about some games having different weapon styles, but them feeling kind of the same. I think that's a good example of that. Excuse me. Sorry, I'm just like drinking copious amounts of Gatorade because, like I said, I'm sick and I don't have much appetite, so I've just been drinking a lot of Gatorade. Papa, at some point, probably. But it's not like a priority or anything. Yeah, I would argue that ESO's system is a glorified hybrid system, but hybrid like tab target light. I think the action combat parts of it are so poor. It's why the game actually feels like shit, ironically. Think about it. If the game felt more like a tab target game, would you really care about the whole wet noodle complaint people have? No, because it wouldn't function the same way. You wouldn't have a wet noodle attack. You wouldn't have this issue of like feeling like your attacks had no weight because there's no physics in the game. So in a sense, had ESO just went more tab target, they could have made an actual better combat system, ironically. Exactly, baiting out CC removers. The Doctor, you know what? It does kind of sound like that, but I've stopped following them after that whole fiasco with the whatever thing. I was just like, I'm done with that. You can give it to your grandkids. Excuse me, sorry. If modern MMOs somehow make their game more challenging, like WoW Classic, would they surpass it? I don't think just making it challenging for the sake of it is the issue. When we talk about challenge, it's funny because challenge and difficulty can really trigger people. Like, don't get me started on the whole Dark Souls conversations, but it's like, I actually think it's better to make an MMO that has content that fits different levels, but it's not difficulty based. I think that's an incredibly lazy way to do things that developers have just been doing now because they make theme park games where they just want to essentially make the same dungeon 7 times instead of creating new dungeons that occupy each skill level and really kind of push you in these different ways, right? Like, I think clearly the just slapping another difficulty level on is a way lazier approach. The problem is that it just makes the innovation and makes the content itself worse. It also makes it less approachable because as many players would tell you from these old MMOs, when you're sitting around, people start recruiting for a group. You start asking or kind of like wondering, like, what are y'all doing? Like, they take you along with them. Next thing you know, you're involved in something. You're getting a high level gear. You're involved in some level of like in-game content that's just you never expected to even get exposed to. And maybe you learned the hard way, maybe you learned the easy way, whatever. But the point being is that there's this breadth of content that you can just decide, you know what? I want to do something easy today, so I'm kind of just going to do this stuff. Or like, I want to do something really challenging today, so I'm going to do this. Like, versus just being like, I'm just going to do the same thing until I do the hard mode of it. And then I'm going to do the harder mode of it until I do the hard mode of it. I feel like that's effective, but just incredibly lazy for game development. And it's also just making dungeons and raids and a lot of the content that you're experiencing worse, like objectively. Like, if you could just make better raids, better dungeons that satisfy these skill levels, what's the argument for that not being better, I guess? I mean, I don't even know if you can. Think about that. Specializing a dungeon for a difficulty level versus just like tacking on balancing to make it difficult. It's like, well, yeah. So difficulty and challenging is important, but I think it's more in the totality of the game, right? So the leveling experience should be easy enough, but here's where I think all the developers in the current modern MMOs are just, basically they're not doing it wrong, they're doing it in a way that they don't care. Because the race is to get to the end game and participate in this essentially content that expires over time as fast as possible. And so many developers, instead of continuing the legacy of building these story experiences throughout the leveling experience, have most of the time just kind of skipped that altogether. In some cases, some games have just gone fully level scaled. So they've completely removed that from the game. And what am I talking about? Well, progressive difficulty is built into the leveling experience. So when you remove the actual leveling experience, you get worse players, you get a worse game, and I really don't see the positive at that point. I guess the idea is that if you try and attempt it and you fuck up, then, well, you just made a boring leveling experience, but it's like, okay, well, like, let's take that out of the equation for a second. And let's say it's like a pretty good one. What's the downside of it versus not doing that approach? More money spent on it, more time spent on it. Yeah, but people will replay that more, right? Look at Warhammer Online. How many people here have made multiple characters in Warhammer Online? If any of you that have played Warhammer Online don't raise your hand, I don't believe you. And I mean, like, seriously, like, it's that kind of game that was specifically designed, just like Dragon Age Origins, to play it again. And it's like, that seems like a better experience to teach you how to play the game than to just be like, lock onto your one character, get through the whole leveling experience, get to the end, and then now you're in hard mode. Huh, nobody wants to play savage mode. I wonder why. It's like, because the game is so fucking easy, and then suddenly savage mode. It's like, what? Like, suddenly it's a trial. It's like, what the fuck? Like, people complain about L4Rs and LPDs, but it's like, but imagine those players' perspectives. When they're complete non-MMO players, they don't even play MMOs normally. And so suddenly they're thrust into this fucking in-game experience because it's rushed to the end game. And then everyone's mad at them. Oh, like, how come you don't do it? It's like, bro, I just joined the game. I've seen that happen so many times with new players get yelled at because of things like that, you know? Excuse me. Did I ever play Outlaws Online? Only briefly, I'll be honest, like a trial or something like that. Yeah, so to go further on what I'm saying about the challenge is important, but it has to be challenged in the full context of the game, right? It can't just be challenged like people love to say, but WoW is harder than it was back then because we have Mythic mode, and Mythic Plus, and it's like, that's an irrelevant argument because the amount of players that are playing that mode is literally like a fraction of the players that are playing the game, period. And a fraction of the players that even just beat the Lich King, that even just beat, you know, Onyxia, Ragnaros. You get the idea. So essentially these arguments of like, yes, but we have these highly specialized gameplays that are only like for 0.3% play. It's like, okay, it doesn't mean your game's hard. I'm sorry. It means that a very specific part of your game is hard and challenging. But the rest of your game is so easy. And so that actually, to your points, I'm seeing the chat go up about this, that does make the game worse. It actually makes it, the content lasts not as long, right? Think about, let's use SWTOR as an example. Let's talk about SWTOR. Now in SWTOR's case, it's a roleplay centric game. Now people might ask, just very honestly, whenever you're new to the game, why is the game so easy? Why is it so easy? Like, you know, just an honest question. Why is it so easy? There's nothing offensive about asking that. Like, you've played KOTOR 1, maybe KOTOR 2, Mass Effect. Suddenly you're playing this game, you're like, man, this game is really easy. I'm not even playing on easy. It's like, why is this game so easy? Well, what if I told you the game didn't used to be easy? It actually used to be really challenging. SWTOR was one of the more challenging MMOs. In fact, I would even argue that like leveling experience in SWTOR and the story experience was probably one of the more challenging ones I've experienced. You see what I'm saying? It's like, so what changed? What happened? Well, in open beta, they got a bunch of negative publicity from a bunch of players who don't play MMOs, talking about how difficult the game was. Oh, I can't beat the game when I'm underleveled. I can't beat this boss when I'm severely underleveled. I have to get my friend to help me because my class isn't that good 1v1. Complaints like that. And it's like, you're playing an MMO though. But they weren't really, right? It's a multiplayer online RPG, as we learned later on. But the point is that that's how it was sold, right? It was sold as an MMO, So players were like, I want my story single player experience, but as an MMO, which is hard to do, right? So suddenly you're a healer that doesn't do any damage, and you had a harder time maybe winning a certain fight. Actually, that's not the case. I think it was only like certain DPSs that had very poor healers and didn't have access to tanks. It was based on your companion choices. So I don't remember the exact specifics, and I never struggled with it. I played the game like for thousands of hours, so obviously I wasn't struggling through it. But the point was is that there were a couple fights when I was 47, 45, 43, where I was a couple levels under, and I died. I can fairly say I loved that. That was awesome. I died on my story experiences. I had to go do that shit again. Well, once they let everyone know about that, they completely undid that stuff. So as soon as the game came out, what happens? Can anyone just like intuitively go through this and think that I'm not just being a hater? Like, let's logically get through it together. What happens if your whole game is based on a single player story experience with a little bit of in-game multiplayer experiences, and you make the game incredibly easy? What happens? That 100-hour experience that you planned for people to have, and that's exactly what happened to SWTOR. I watched it happen. The game went from being this long because it was challenging and you had to work on things and so on and so forth, to suddenly, and then it kept shrinking and shrinking and shrinking. How does it keep shrinking? Companions now can do everything. Now armor doesn't really matter. Then it's like, what the? To the point to where essentially going through SWTOR, it's just a story experience, but a poor story experience that could have been even better, because most of you that experienced it didn't experience it at the heyday, sadly. You didn't experience it when the story was actually challenging. And why does that matter? Well, just like I recorded on stream one time, if everyone is telling me in the game, watch out for this dude, man, he's gonna mess you up, he's gonna mess you up, he's gonna mess you up, he's gonna mess you up. Like the Wizard in Neverwinter Nights 1, I go up to him and I'm like, you're trash, bro. He fires a spell, insta-kills you. One of my favorite scenes in any game ever. And it's because he's trying to teach you, I told you I'm more powerful than you. Why are you not listening, bro? I'll just kill you in one spell, right? Like, but, damn, what was I saying before that? Because that wizard actually is one of my, I always forget his name. It's from the, I think, Hordes of the Underdark expansion, or Shadows of Undertide. I always get them mixed up. But it's like that wizard that you talk to, who basically just one-shots you. Anyway, the point being is that that danger in that game exists to where if I push towards that, I should just get eliminated, right? There should be levels that I should not be able to overcome. And when everyone's telling me about the big bad Boonga boss guy, because I don't remember even what boss I'm talking about, but there was like a boss in like the first like 15 levels of like the Sith Warrior, where they're all hyping him up, and I kid you not, on the stream, I close my eyes and just beat on him, and he just dies. And it's just like, can anyone just lie to me about why that's epic, I guess, at this point? Because I can't see it any other way, but like, can someone just try to tell me why that's an epic experience? It's like imagine in a martial art movie, everyone's getting beat up by Bruce Lee, and then suddenly you encounter Bruce Lee and it's like, he ain't Bruce Lee, you know? It wasn't what you expected it to be. You're pretty let down, like whether or not you're watching it or getting your ass kicked by Bruce Lee, obviously, or whatever. But point being is like, you have a certain expectation of what that is supposed to be, right? What the Bruce Lee level of something is supposed to be. And when you don't actually get that expectation met, then yeah, it's a letdown. I think that sorry, I was trying to see what you guys are talking about now, because I'm so far behind on the chat. Oh right, that essentially by forcing players to treat level experiences like they're trivial, you treat players to be worse. That's just inarguable. This is coming from someone who's dedicated their life to, you know, video games, but also martial arts. And I'll give you a martial art analogy. That's why I brought up Bruce Lee. I'm a massive fan of all the martial art movies, but think about it this way. You bring in a new student, and I've seen stuff like this happen, so I'm also giving you like testimonies, where a kid comes in, or dude or whatever, girl, whatever, comes in, They train, but they train only to avoid the uncomfortable parts of the training. Now, for many people watching, you're probably scratching your head being like, isn't that the point? Yes. But some people don't want to deal with that, even the people that still go to these classes. So you'll still encounter that. And how do you deal with it? Well, you have to basically convince these people that it's actually in their best interest to allow yourself to get to these vulnerable positions so you can work out of them. And that's really hard for a lot of people. Sometimes people just straight quit. Like, I've had training sessions, like, you know, I don't always like to talk about these kind of things, but it's like, I've had sessions where it's like, I've beat dudes up, never seen them again. And why did I beat them up? Because they were going really hard on me. They either didn't know my skill level or they just didn't have any control. And so it's like in martial arts, at the end of the day, how you meet that is you meet that with response, with like a fight, essentially, right? And so to give you an even more specific example, in something like grappling, you have to train to be in these bad positions because you get caught in them sometimes. So now imagine you were never taught to be in a bad position. Never taught. Just kept avoiding it. You're a fucking star. You're the best. You're the best. You're the best. You're the best. That's what MMOs in these days, modern days, do, by the way. That's the analogy. Now imagine suddenly you're encountered into this other like person who's actually trying to attack you, someone on the street, maybe someone who's also trained, whatever the scenario is. Guess what you're gonna get? A reality check. Because that's not how combat works. Combat isn't consensual in most cases, right? It's not like the other person's gonna be like, okay, so like you punch, and then I let you punch, and then like a kid, and like you go, and then I go, and it's like, okay, we take turns, and it's like, no, that's how it works in the training room a lot of the time. But because you didn't train in these bad positions, and for these bad things to happen to you, you essentially have no idea how to prepare for them. So now throw that into the context of an MMO, and combat is combat. It's just video game combat, but it's the same kind of concepts, where it's essentially now, your combatants, which are most of all MMOs are these days, you're just a combatant. That's all you do is fight. So essentially, if you're a bad fighter, then it feels pretty lackluster, the game or the gameplay experiences. But anyway, so essentially, in order to combat that kind of approach and allowing, rather, the way you combat the player base not knowing enough is by introducing both education and challenge at the same time, right? Like, you guys remember this in school. It's like you a little bit of challenge, you overcome it, reward, boom. So that's how you do it, right? So nobody here is saying let's make every MMO single player leveling experience whatever, like super difficult and like Dark Souls. No, like maybe some games can do that. All I'm asking for is a leveling experience that's an actual leveling experience, right? Like that's going to progressively change in difficulty, progressively add different monsters, progressively give me powers. And when I say progressively, I don't mean disproportionately, because if I'm just too powerful, then what the fuck is the point? It goes back to my SWTOR. It's like me being in martial art class and just beating up on a bunch of beginners. What is the point of that? It's fun. I guess it's fun for some people with things wrong, generally speaking, but and it's fun for a little bit, but it's like, that's not what I'm doing martial arts for. I'm doing martial arts for a challenge and to push myself and to learn more. So if I'm trying to play a video game to create fun experiences, then I want to do stuff like that too. So by developers not even having like compelling and challenging leveling experiences, they're cheating every single player in the game. And it's sad because it's like the argument is essentially going to be, well, we don't have to. And well, if we make it too difficult, then certain players will complain and not want to play anymore. Well, guess what? At some point, as a developer, you have to make decisions to do that. Like, even as an artist, you have to. At some point, you have to say, you know what? Like, this is what our game is. You cannot subsequently complain. And this, I see this in Final Fantasy XIV, and I see this in WoW all the time. It fucking cracks me up. People complain endlessly about the quality of players, the quality of groups, da-da-da-da-da. Why? The game does nothing to get them ready for that. You can't blame it on those players. And like, I'm a hardcore player arguing that. I'm arguing in favor of the casual players. You can't put that perspective on them without them getting the proper educations. And I'm not just saying like you just have to like lessen your experience because they're just like getting forced into situations you're in. I get the frustration there. But what I'm saying is that at least recognize that it's the developer's fault. The developers are messing up. They have to make the early game experiences more challenging to get the players ready for the dungeons and the raids. I'll bring up another analogy. This one is an actual MMO. Guild Wars 2. Guild Wars 2, when it first came out, I've told this story many times, and I'll tell it on a video. It had very challenging dungeons. Why? Because the fucking raids in that game are and strikes are challenging as hell, right? In fact, I think like it was like statistics came out on like what the damages were, and it was like the top 10% of the player base was doing like 5 times or 10 times the damage. There was like some insane statistics that came out about this, proving this point that Guild Wars 2 essentially had this problem where the strikes and raids later on were so difficult, and there was nothing leading into that. But there used to be. The dungeons were what led into that. The leveling experience and the dungeons led into that. But guess what happened? After the dungeons got easified and the leveling experience got easified, essentially, now you're just thrust it right into the raids and the trials and, or sorry, the strikes. And yeah, you can't do anything about that. Well, to be clear about why my voice sounds different, I just saw a comment about that. I'm not only am I sick, I don't have my sound set up here. So when I do my voice thing, I put pillows on me and shit and like create like a pillow fort and shit. I'm not doing that shit. 30 minutes behind chat, definitely. Diablo 4 PvP felt like One Punch Man. Whoever landed that crit went through the shield first wins. Not good to hear. I was kind of looking forward to Diablo 4. What made you interested in investigating games? So mystery is my favorite genre, and I've always been a massive fan of mystery and noir and crime and thrillers and so on and so forth. So I grew up, you know, solving mysteries in the books and shows and movies that I would watch. And so naturally, when I would play video games, I wanted to learn so much about them. And when I realized that really not anybody has even taken the time to kind of chronicle these games, and theoretically they're just dying, and there's no preservation acts for some of them. And in fact, the legality there is still moving slowly. So like, I kind of felt, as I mentioned at the top, when I mentioned that these MMOs and online games have given me so much, I mean that literally. Like, without them, I don't think I would be living. They kept me for many thousands of hours occupied when I was going through like PTSD, depression stuff, and you know, just all kinds of horrible situations. Like, MMOs taught me how to socialize, taught me how to make friends, taught me how to believe in myself, how to be like confident more so. Online games in general did that. And so I definitely have a lot of affection for them. And so there's a bit of that idea of like, well, I wanted to start by talking about the stories that I knew intimately, which is what all the videos that I started with are, essentially. But then over time, it started to become like, well, I've played the majority of MMOs, especially the major ones, but like, the truth is I haven't played them all. So how can I also talk about these other ones and tell these stories? And so people can learn either why these games were good, why they sucked, or why they didn't work out. And what I found is that a lot of people just simplify the story of a game and just really anything based on how much it got success monetarily. And I've always hated that. I've always been against that, like intrinsically. Value isn't just defined on how much money is made. And so I also felt like that was a bit of my burden, is to be like, some of these games actually did some really cool stuff and really good stuff. And people just talk about them like they're failures only, you know? Yeah, Zombie Jesus. That's like most people's experience is that ESO's combat's just so easy that you can just turn your brain off. And it's just like, it's a shame because that's not Morrowind. That's not Skyrim. That's not Oblivion. That's not fucking Daggerfall. Like, these games all have difficulty levels. You can just crank it right up and this shit's fucking hard as fuck. Can't wait for the Death of a Hearthstone video. Definitely will come at some point. Oh wow, playing Guild Wars 2 on your Steam Deck. I have to see a video of that. What do you think is the most griefable example? Camping lobies in WoW. I mean, but you camp lobies in WoW. What's the downside? You respawn. It's like not really that. Like to me, the most griefable MMO is an MMO that you can literally like keep killing someone. That was Darkfall. In Darkfall, somebody could be binding someone, and you do what's called bind camping, where you keep killing them every time they spawn. Hard up, have you been playing any MMOs recently? Well, besides, I mentioned earlier, playing Guild Wars every now and then. MMO specifically, no. But none of them have my interest. And also, none of the new ones are in a playable enough state for me to go play those either. Like TL and Project whatever, and get the Project BBQ. I don't remember all the other code names, but Code Lyoko. I'm just kidding. But anyway, but as new MMOs come out, even if I'm not super interested in them, I play them anyway, and I'll make videos about them. That's always been kind of my goal. It's just that like reviews aren't, obviously, as you guys know, my standard thing because they take fucking forever for me to do. But at the moment, like I mentioned at the top, I've been wanting to get into a community MMO that I can play with the players in my community. There's a couple options for that. Like you can do group Ironmans now in RuneScape. That's pretty cool. That'd be a cool option. There's City of Heroes, the Homecoming server. We could probably commit to doing NGE Galaxies. I think it's better than doing pre-CU. I think pre-CU is just a bit hard to get players into. To get as involved in it because it has a lot less in terms of scripted content. Excuse me. Other than that, those are kind of the only ones I have in mind because of those are the ones that you have to play with people. You might not like Hearthstone, but I definitely don't think it's dead. Still makes a lot of money. I'm probably done here soon, guys. My voice is just, I'm totally wiped. Roadblock, basically you have to make it less linear. To create build a game where the in-game players can support and play to lower levels, and you have to create incentive for them to do that. I think something that like a lot of players run into an issue of, and it annoys me endlessly when people say, but you can be social in these current games. I guess you can literally, but like why would you? You don't have much of a reason to. Yeah, but then you're just being antisocial. No, the point is the game's supposed to make me want to be. That's the whole point, right? So you can't just rely on, yeah, but the goodness of people's heart, they'll just be nice to you. It's like, is that how history's worked? It's like, no, like we have like laws and like systems and like whole thought processes that go through with this. So it's like, how do you make more fortunate people help less fortunate people? Charity, education, mentoring, right? Like these things actually have existed in MMOs before, but they're just not done that much anymore. And also, typically speaking, in-game is where you end up anyway. So the early game experiences are just zones that you basically just waste your time through, and then you're done with them. There's no significance to go back to those zones. Final Fantasy XI has a big issue of that, where it has massive open zones, and there's no one there. There's no reason to be there. So how do you fix that? Developers just have to approach it differently. You have to approach it more like Asheron's Call, where the world itself is developing constantly. More so than just sending everyone to specific areas that then get immediately abandoned when there's no significance to go there anymore. That's called theme park content, though. A lot of people like it and enjoy it. I do too. It just doesn't last. And it shouldn't be the only way we're making the games. Mighty Sam, it's because the game's just much easier, essentially. They got rid of things like equipment with your companions because you don't need to. You can just pick what they want them to do, you know? Thanks, Cassires, I appreciate that. Rumbleverse? Interesting. Do I play Smite? No, I did a little bit, though. What do I think about Smite? Honestly, hate the gameplay. I hate the engine and I hate the company. It's not a bad game though. Could you name a few MMOs that do these things properly? Yeah, Warhammer Online, classic WoW, up to Wrath, I would argue. Um, let's see. I mean, I would even say Star Wars Galaxy's NGE, personally. I think that the Legacy Quest system is great. I know some people hate on it, but I like it. It's a lot better than the Mission Terminal system. I would also say Asheron's Call had a mentor system and a pretty in-depth like leveling system as well. You had to go like find spells and stuff like that. Those are probably, I mean, of course, RuneScape is a god tier game because it just has classic progression. So it's like you go through being the journeyman to being more advanced to being the expert to, you know, so on and so forth. So I would probably say that those are some of the best examples of games that have a slow enough build that you can kind of like work your way through the game and feel like the challenge goes up progressively and doesn't become too boring. The issue is that some games can have some of those things, but like SWTOR's problem, it's just so easy. And I really recommend anyone to play SWTOR. It's a great game, it has great story and some really fun storylines. But I also hate parts about the game. Like it's one of the games that I love the most. It's also one of the games I hate the most. And I hate that so many of their mistakes just feel like it's like, what were you doing? Like, why did you even do this? You know, lowering the difficulty seemed like such a short-term gain that I don't really think benefited them that much in the end, actually. Unless their sole goal was to make money off the cash shop, I guess. But even then, I don't even think that that's a good idea. Wolf Among Us 2, interesting. Didn't know that they're still going to come out with that. Basically, Adric, and then wondering when people are not very good once they get to the end because they don't care if they're any good or competent. Like that's a sad thing to say, but like many developers don't seem to care anymore about that because of how they're designing the game. Doesn't lend itself to that. And we know that already because we have other practices that we can use for comparison, like martial arts or education systems and so on and so forth. Yeah, and I understand it too, Adric. It also sets them up to continuously funnel content into the end game to sell new expansions. So it's also based on that kind of thing. With monetization in the way of subscriptions basically dying off, kind of what we got in replacement, you know, kind of sucked. Yeah, so Damien, I will put them on my other YouTube channel, the Six Pixels Under podcast channel. I just have to download this and then upload it there, and not my main channel, but it should be there. And then I think the VOD should be on my Twitch for a certain amount of time, so you can always download it or just watch it there. No, Code Lyoko is not a game. I was just trolling. Sorry. I was hoping I didn't have to do this, so I'm gonna mute my camera, but I'm like leaking. Yeah, I'm good. Do you feel like MMOs are dying as a genre? No, I think that it's just that their scope has basically widened so much that nobody even knows what they are anymore, what they're supposed to be. If y'all hear that little squeaking, that's my girl telling me that she needs to go out, so I'm gonna have to head out here. So get your last questions in. Thoughts on AOC Plus? You mean like Asheron's Call? Or Ashes of Creation? Or Age of Conan? Do I need to play KOTOR 1 and 2 before SWOTOR? Honestly, I would probably say yeah. Like, or at least like watch like a breakdown of the stories if you don't want to play those games. They're good in themselves. They're good in itself, but they also really do help you understand the world. I don't really have much to say about Ashes of Creation because it seems like a lot of cool ideas, but I haven't really seen a lot of like actual proof of them working, especially in the context of a world. I think that they're doing a lot of cool things, like public dungeons are incredibly risky, but I respect them for doing that. Obviously, I think the visuals are really overdone and way too much particle effects and shiny stuff going on, which makes the combat really hard to track and scenes and battles really hard to essentially deal with. But other than that, I like that they're trying to do big things. I like that they're trying to approach it in the way of a world, at least somewhat. But I'll say that their whole, like I've mentioned before, concept and system regarding the node system, I think is incredibly simplistic. And I've mentioned this before, but in a custom server in Rust, I literally had a better system than that. So I mean, like it feels incredibly rudimentary, and hopefully that system can be evolved on, because even if it is in place, the rest of the game would have to be supporting in the design for that to function properly if it wasn't better, if that makes sense. So. Yeah, so I think that they're doing a lot of interesting things, and as you can tell, I'm incredibly excited to see what they have in store. But I'm not the biggest hype beast as well, so I feel like that's also why people don't like to come to me to talk about new games as much. They're like, "You're gonna like kill the hype. He's not gonna build it." But it's just that like with worlds and MMOs, and I'll end on this note, guys. You have to see it in action. The world has to function. It's an ecosystem. It has to be living and breathing. And if it doesn't do those things, and it's just a game, then it'll offer maybe an experience, a fun experience, a much smaller experience than what it's trying to accomplish or saying it's trying to accomplish if it's calling itself an MMO. Yeah. Hype is cocaine to me, yo, I need it. How dare you be reserved in nuance? Yeah, no, again, it's just because like I've been in the watch parties, I've been in the midnight releases, I have multiple pre-order games in my record, famous ones, SWOTOR, Collector's Edition, Mortal, Collector's Edition, Darkfall, so on and so forth. The box edition of Rage of Wookiees of Galaxies. Like, you get the point. I have so many, like, Wildstar Alpha Tester, SWOTOR Alpha Tester. What else did I alpha test? MMO wise, I should say specifically, because I've also alpha tested every Blizzard RTS, but well, besides Warcraft 2, because I was like 5 or some shit. But you get the point. Like, I've been around enough of these games and hyped myself up like insane levels to be like, you know what, my approach is now like, show me a beta, show me like enough players making the world function, and I'll sell that game myself. You know, like I'll talk about it being fun and all. I'm not selling, you have to pay me for that, but I mean, like, I'll talk about the game and be like, this game's awesome, and hype it up and so on and so forth. But yeah, I'm just I need to see it to believe it at this point. No, I have to leave, Jess, because I'm literally sick, so I literally don't feel good, so I hope you guys have a better day than me. How did I alpha test Warcraft 3? Well, it was actually Warcraft 3. What was the first expansion? It's not Frozen Throne. I can never remember the first expansion. You guys know what it is. It was the first expansion. Reign of Chaos. Dude, I don't like, what the fuck took me so long on that. Yeah, it was Reign of Chaos, then it was Frozen Throne. Yeah, so Reign of Chaos is when I got to alpha test the game. And just to be clear, I didn't mention it, but StarCraft 2, I was a long time alpha tester. I have an alpha test banner, and in Heroes of the Storm I do as well, and in Hearthstone I do as well. So essentially every Blizzard title that's been major for the past like 15 years I've alpha tested. And if you're gonna ask me why or how, I have no fucking clue. Just like Amazon always invites me to everything, I don't have no clue. But these people found out about me. But so yeah, who knows how? But oh yeah, well, Z. Beyond that note, I alpha tested and beta tested a lot of games when I was underage. Statute of limitations, though, you know what I'm saying? I'm just kidding. But anyway, it's not that big of a deal. But yeah, like, of course, people can intuit that based on how old I am, that based on the time I was playing these games, I was underage. It doesn't take a genius to figure that out. Like, man, when I was playing Galaxies, I think I was like 14 or 13 or some shit. Yeah, so think about that. When I was tested, when I tested SWTOR, I was still underage. I was 17. I distinctively remember that because we went to Seattle at PAX, and I'm meeting the developers. Daniel Erickson's there. Fucking the Mizuka, one of the heads, is there. There's like some serious big wigs that are there, and so I'm over there looking at these big wigs from the window, thinking, can I even get into the bar? Because I was 17. So, needless to say, my friends got me in because they were like all like together, and we all just kind of went in. But that's how young I was, for reference, back then. Of course, I'm 29 now. I'm old, but then, you know, SWTOR, I was 17, showing up, sneaking into bars underage, just so I could go learn more about SWTOR. Like, what a nerd! What a nerd! I have no life. Anyway, I don't know much about that, Stefan. It's a shame though. I know that Skate has some issues with monetization. That people are really mad, and that's not the same kind of series, but it's the same kind of vitriol people get. But it's the inner beard that counts. Yeah, I was gonna say my hair and my beard comes from the fact that my genetics are just like god tier for hair and growing things. So it's like, trust me, bro, it's nothing that I'm doing. You know, I'm just living my life. But I do agree. The inner beard and the inner big dick is what matters the most. Okay, on that note, I gotta go like half die whenever I take my dog out because it's been pretty hard to walk around. I'm like, I look like a fucking dead, like, walking patient or near death walking patient. Yeah, Norse Bloodlines just like, you know, oh yeah, the gains. I've been working out a lot. I can show that off. That's also Norse Bloodlines. Thanks, genetics. Because yeah, my dad's side, we're all small, tiny. But thank God for, you know, genetics on my mom's side helped me get a little bit bigger. All right, guys. I'll see you guys later. It was good chatting with everyone. As you can tell, I'm genuinely under the weather. I'm over here holding myself up and shit. Like, I'm like, that's how, I just feel weak. Don't worry, I'm not like, hopefully, not my last video, but I'm not dying or nothing. Just weak, need rest, need to just eat, honestly. All right, guys. I'll see y'all later. And oh yeah, save your questions for me next week. We'll meet the same time, give or take. Actually, it might be a little bit later, because the reason why I said 2 p.m. initially or 3 p.m. Eastern was because I do my workouts. I train from 11 to 2. And so that didn't happen today because I'm sick. I'm not gonna go train with people while I'm sick, get them sick. But yeah. Anyway, so just any other thoughts, questions, topics that come out throughout the week that you have nobody to chat about because nobody cares about MMO? No, I'm just kidding, but you get the idea. Feel free to join me next week, same time, 3 p.m. Eastern. I'll see you guys then. Peace.